Hello, YouTube. This is Juniper Crown with a book review of the book Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep by Philip K. Dick. Now, the reason that I decided to post this book review is that I don't really have a clue what I'd like to post on this channel, and really, with this quarantine, that the only thing I've been doing recently is just reading books, maybe learning some Python, uh, and going through job applications to get to my next career path and stuff. And ever since I graduated college, ever since I went through college, I lost my hobby of reading. It's mainly because, in college you don't really have any time to do any reading. It's because you're too busy studying and stuff. And I used to be an avid reader growing up, especially in elementary and middle school. I remember distinctly reading books like Redwall and The Giver. They really piqued my interest and inspired me to read more. I also remember reading the Junie B. Jones books in elementary school. I really like those a lot. As I think my first favorite author growing up was Ron Roy, and he was the author of the A to Z mysteries. That definitely inspired me to start reading and stuff. So basically, after graduating college, I got to work at my career working in sales. But I never, got around to getting back to reading. And I think this was the first fiction book that I've read in a long time. The other one being Michelle Houellebecq's The Elementary Particles, which is a totally different book in itself. But today I'm going to focus on Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? So this book, it was the book that inspired the movies Blade Runner and Blade Runner 2049. Though obviously, the original Blade Runner is much better, I hear. And I already saw that movie, and I never got around to watching 2049. But apparently, people don't say that it's not as bad as how critics describe it. But I need to get around to watching it. I've always been a fan of the cyberpunk aesthetic, but I never actually got around to reading the books that built the world. The only things I did was that I always liked watching cyberpunk anime. You can see its influences everywhere. But I watched Ghost in the Shell and I watched Blade Runner. I never actually consumed that much media around cyberpunk, but I feel that the way that cyberpunk novels describe the world as being something almost dystopian, controlled by corporations, where, one thing that I've been thinking a lot lately is how our rights to privacy have been totally destroyed. And I'm pretty sure that, both America and the entire world is barreling towards a future that is a lot similar to what is described in a lot of different cyberpunk novels. Though I think a lot of these books were written back in the 80s, so there's some dated things, in the book specifically, and he mentions about the Soviet Union and Russia and stuff. And I feel that, I think cyberpunk's going through its own renaissance at this time. And I think someone needs to reinterpret the entire genre to fit the modern world. It just hasn't happened yet, and so for the time being, I've been consuming all these books and media around cyberpunk. So to just get into what this book is about, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? The main character is a guy called Rick Deckard, and he's basically a bounty hunter who hunts androids. They live in this post-apocalyptic Earth, one that's been destroyed by a nuclear dystopia that has set clouds of radiation everywhere. You basically don't see that much wildlife, to the point where actual live organic animals are seen as something that's very treasured. They've entirely rebuilt their society so that they basically have this sort of religious cult that holds these organic animals to be something that's so sacred. So Rick Deckard, the main character in this book, or before I go into that, everyone in this novel, all the characters, they sort of have to farm their own animals. Not necessarily farm, but they have to take care and own like one animal, and that's something that each person in the world does, or at least in the setting for San Francisco, where they built this sort of social hierarchy depending on what sort of animal you're taking care of. So, like, one guy might be taking care of a squirrel, and then actually someone else might be taking care of a horse. And people, if you take care of a horse, you're seen as having much higher social standing than others, whereas other animals are totally extinct. The main character here in this novel, Rick Deckard, owns an electric sheep, and the cause of that was that he used to own an organic sheep that midway in the past it died off, and he had to covertly replace that sheep with a fake one because he didn't want to lose his social standing within his community for not taking care of an actual live animal. And I think there might also be some penalties related to that, but from what I remember in the novel, it's strictly a social impact you get for not raising your own animal. And so basically, there's this entire, sort of black market economy set up to support people who don't have their own organic animals and create these electronic doppelgangers that, from a distance, people can't tell whether or not they're, real or not. And so that's the main conflict right from the outset. Is that Rick Deckard, he has an electric sheep, he wants an organic one, but he doesn't have the money to get his own sheep. He has a neighbor who he confides to the truth. I think his neighbor owns a horse or something, and it's so basic. I'm rambling at this point, but that's the basic idea of it in this novel, right? Is that this running theme throughout this entire novel is the theme of organic versus electronic, real versus non-real, human versus android. In the that's sort of a plot A in the book. A plot B is that as Rick Deckard's main job, he is an android bounty hunter. So in the same way that this society has created electronic sheep, electronic goats, electronic versions of all animals, there's actually the electronic version of humans, androids. And it's the classic story of where there were so many different updates to the android models to the point where the latest model, the Nexus 6 android, is so indistinguishable from actual humans is that they've become nigh, pretty hard to capture. And their one failing is that they fail to display empathy consistently, and so Rick Deckard, as a bounty hunter, needs to administer these empathy tests, called it's called the Voight-Kampff scale. That's the name of the empathy test, where he just basically hooks up an android with a flashlight to their eyes and a patch on their cheek, and he asks them a series of empathy questions to judge whether or not they have a proper empathetic reaction, and from that point, he judges whether or not they're human versus android. And if he does determine that they're androids, it's his job to terminate them, to retire them, as he said. And so, from what I described so far, if you described it to me before I read the book, I frankly wouldn't be that interested in the novel because, the premise seems pretty simplistic. Oh, is this person an android or human? And at the time of the release of this novel, the concept itself must have been very interesting. But now, at this time, it's something that we've already seen in different forms of media related to cyberpunk, that originally took it from this source about the question of how can you tell if an android, walked like a human, talked like a human, and had all the physical appearances and mannerisms of a human. How can you tell whether or not what would be the difference between that electronic organism, that android, versus an actual human with a soul? Whatever that may mean, to have a soul. That's ultimately the question I think that this novel presents, is that what is it that makes humans human beyond just their organic composition? And that's one of also the other things Before I get into that, I also want to go back to my original point. The premise of the novel, it sounds simplistic, but the Philip can actually write the story in the way that makes the scenarios where when Rick goes to test these androids, it's still very exciting and interesting, and it's nothing that you come to like expect. It's not like something simplistic. You know, I this cyberpunk novel, it's sort of inspired off of like your classic crime story of a detective going after criminals. So you still have those high tension situations where, an android might deceive Rick for a moment, but Rick is able to turn things around and just detect whether or not someone's an android at the last split second. I might not be doing this novel justice, but it's pretty engaging. Like, if you're like me, you have a struggle, you have an inability to pay attention that long. And I'd say if you can stick out with the novel until, let's say, in every novel, the beginning has a lot of exposition and it can be very boring. Let me see, flip through this book to see when the story picks up. Yeah, if you can read through the end to the end of chapter 5, that's when the story really picks up and it can tell you, the quality of Philip's writing. If you can make it that far, I think you'll definitely be like me and you'll be able to easily punch through the rest of the novel, which is it's a pretty short book, and I like that because there's a focus on quality over quantity here, and the scenarios that they set up is still very exciting. It is, I feel, having watched Blade Runner, the book is unironically better than the movie, in my opinion. The movie has like amazing aesthetics in its own right, but the tension that the book provides is much better. And I feel it does raise some nice questions about, what is it about humans that make them humans? I think the first thing that people think about when they're posed to that question is, the concept of religion. That's like one of the things that if you try to model the human brain as a computer, you'd put it with all the sort of logical, you know, systems of logic that you'd come to expect a human is capable of doing. And I'm not saying that, I'm not trying to imply that religion would be illogical, but there's some parts of like the way humans behave that we don't understand yet. And I think religion would definitely be one of that, where I guess you could say, some people would say that religion is beyond logic, it's super logical, where like you can't define what exactly that humans are doing when they perform rituals, when they do their chants and prayers related to God. What function does religion exactly play? And I think, a lot of atheists themselves would readily admit that religion can have a positive role to play as a sort of community force for good, like, organizing charities and being a morally upright institution for the most part. Things might get funky when you get, too large as an organization and stuff. Um, but one of these, in this novel, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, they also have their own version of a religion, which is called the Wilbur Mercer religion, Mercerism, and it's pretty weird. Like, this is definitely one of those things that the movie makers for Blade Runner took out completely, didn't mention at all. It's basically where each person in this world, I guess, sort of walks up to this treadmill like machine where they hold on to these two handlebars, and suddenly they're transported, mentally into this scene, into this collective consciousness, collective memory, where everyone shares their emotions and they have this vision of an old man, and his name is Wilbur Mercer. And all he's doing is he's walking up a hill being pelted by rocks. And when these rocks hit Wilbur, the people who are hooked up to this machine can receive the physical pain, the physical cuts and bleeding from, that experience. So that's like this novel's, this world's clear metaphor for religion, I think. But it's something that the androids in the book are frustrated by. They're jealous that humans are able to share in this experience, and they have an incentive to seek out and disprove Wilbur Mercerism as something that's totally fake. Um, and it's sort of a pretty weird situation where it doesn't seem to have any sort of logical, like, it's just pretty weird, where you have this entire religion built around an old man walking up a hill being pelted by rocks. It sounds so weird, but that's literally what it is. But, Philip is able to show how, how this religious system impacts, perhaps might provide a sort of moral basis, a logical basis for the empathy humans have. I don't know what to make, heads or tails of it. I'm not too sure what Phil was trying to prove when he wrote that in. What exactly he was trying to maybe, point out with, Wilbur Mercerism. Maybe he was trying to say that religions, although it's illogical, it can, be a force for moral good or something. I don't know. It was a pretty interesting aspect of the novel, and it stands out like a sore thumb. Like, I think you could totally take the entire plot line of Wilbur Mercerism, and I don't think it would have a very minimal impact on the story overall, save for the ending. I don't know. If you guys have read the novel itself, I definitely would appreciate, your thoughts on what you felt about after reading Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, especially about your thoughts on what the whole Wilbur Mercerism thing was about. I have no clue what it was, except perhaps as a metaphor for religion. So yeah, but this novel was exciting, and I really liked it a lot. And I think that if you guys have time on your hands, it's a quick, small book to read. You should definitely get around to reading it. I think it's definitely better than the movie itself, and it inspired. So that will be all for today. Please leave in the comments what you thought of my review, and I look forward to reading them. Have a nice day.